Excellent. So, welcome to our Aspiring Psychological Professions Community of Practice meeting. This is the follow-up to last month's session on making strong application forms. So today we're going to be thinking about performing well at interview. We are really excited to see so many of you here. We have a lot to get through this evening, and we hope that it will be a really useful meeting for you. Shall we look at the agenda? Excellent. So we're going to think about welcome and introductions and ground rules and the meeting format. Then we're going to be introducing the BPS in the region. We've got Annie Lee coming to, she's here already, which is fantastic. We're going to think about your aims for tonight and what are recruiters looking for. We've got Nicola here who's going to talk about top tips for interview, which is going to be great. We'll think about what to expect in an interview for the psychological professions in particular. Then we have Kevin, who's going to talk to us about experts by experience on interview panels. And then there'll be a chance to ask us some questions. We really welcome your feedback and interaction, so do please put any questions in the chat and we'll answer them at the end. If we don't have time to answer them, we'll make sure that we follow up and put the answers to the questions on the website. Excellent. Shall we have some introductions then? So I'm Maggie Rosario. I'm chair of the Psychological Professions Network in the East of England. Anna, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everybody, I'm Anna. I'm a senior assistant psychologist working within the East of England PPN, and I also work in the Talking Therapies digital team for the Psychological Therapies for Severe Mental Health Problems team.
Thank you, Anna. We also normally have Lara with us, but she's on holiday today, so she couldn't join us. We also have a really fantastic steering group who contribute to these sessions and help us think about how best to present material, what material we should present and so on. If you would like to be part of the steering group, it's a really great opportunity for you to understand more about the psychological professions and take part in these sessions. Do make contact with us if you want to be part of the steering group. We really welcome your contributions. Anna, you're going to talk about the ground rules, aren't you?
Yes. So as Maggie has mentioned, this meeting today is being recorded so that we'll have a link for it that we can share with you all afterwards. We do ask that everybody keeps their microphones on mute and keep your cameras off. If you do have any questions, please then just pop them into the chat function as Maggie mentioned, and we'll try and answer them either in this webinar, or if we don't, we'll create a document and circulate that afterwards. We really want this webinar, this meeting space, to be as safe as possible, to be a confidential and respectful place where people don't feel judged or in a pressured environment. We want it to be as supportive as possible. So please try and remember that when questions do come into the chat function, or if you want to add in any comments, please just try and bear those in mind.
Also, we wanted to remind you at the end of this session, we will ask you for your feedback. Please give it to us. It really shapes what we do. So it's really important to us to hear from you. Please do complete the feedback form. So without further ado, let's introduce Anna Lee. Let's hope that the IT works for you.
Thank you very much. I hope everybody can hear me. It's wonderful to see that you prepared a slide for me. So I was going to say that I am Anna Lee Game and I'm the chair of the East of England British Psychological Society branch, etc., but you can see that all there. It's fabulous just to have an opportunity to speak to you very briefly, just to let you know really that the British Psychological Society does have an East of England branch. Our purpose is really to be the human face of what many people I know find to be quite a large bureaucratic organisation to navigate, the British Psychological Society as a whole. And one of the ways that we try to humanise the BPS is really to reach out and help all psychologists in the Eastern region to connect. We are trying primarily to provide networking opportunities, knowledge exchange opportunities, and our focus is really on interdisciplinarity. You know, the benefits of bringing together insights from many different areas of psychology and speaking to psychologists who practice in areas that perhaps we have very little or minimal knowledge of. So that's one of the key things that we're trying to do. I should add that the East of England branch is a very new branch relative to others that are much more established within the BPS. And of course, over the COVID years, there was pretty much a lull in activities, we might say. So we're trying very much now to work on activities that will help us to build momentum and to help people in the region with an interest in psychology to reconnect again and to have a space to do that. So Maggie reached out to me, and we've started to talk about how the East of England branch of the BPS might work more closely with the PPN. East of England branch, because we do share some sort of similar aims as far as, you know, that working together to realise the benefits of psychology in whichever way that we might be using it. Of course, another aspect of the East of England branch is that we also are reaching out to members of the public and trying to promote psychology in general as a useful tool in society. I think that's really all I wanted to say, just to maybe look out for perhaps more from me and Maggie combined, but also to, if you are a member, to look out for our newsletters where we'll be announcing the different events that we are doing and so on. And I'm just popping in the chat a link to an event that we have coming up on the 12th of July at Anglia Ruskin University. And this is going to be Audrey Tang, who's going to do a sort of mini wellbeing workshop, which will help people to develop some quick but useful tools for dealing with the stress crisis moment and build resilience going forward. So that may be of interest to many of you. You don't have to be a member of the BPS to come along to that event. It's from 6 until 8 on the 12th of July, central Cambridge. So if you can make that, you just need to sort of register for the event through the sort of Eventbrite link that I've put in the chat, and then that would be fabulous to see you. So if you can make that, that would be wonderful. Otherwise, I hope to have further opportunities to speak to you all in the future. So thank you very much for the opportunity to come along today.
Thank you so much for coming. That sounds like a great event, and we certainly really welcome the opportunity to work together with the BPS. So it's really great that we're in contact and communication and thinking about what we can do together for the benefit of our members and for the public. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think you've got a really packed and interesting session tonight. So if you don't mind me, I'll just leave you to that now, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Take care. Anna, you're going to take us on to the next bit, aren't you?
Yeah, so what would be really helpful is obviously we've got a very busy agenda, as you all saw at the beginning, but what we'd really like to know from all of you who are attending today is actually what your aims are and what you would like to learn from this webinar. So if you could just put some of your thoughts that you've got in the chat, then we can have a look at that. We can try and have a little bit of a focus of that hopefully at the end when we've got some questions. If you've got any questions that might come in response to this, then we can look at those at the end of the webinar. But yeah, just a moment or two just to have a think about what it is you'd like to learn from this webinar. Obviously with it having a focus on how to perform well in an interview. Maggie, are you happy if we go on to the next slide and then we can look back at these
if you don't want to listen to
later on?
And again, my headphones.
Sorry, I'm speaking and I'm muted. I'm saying, can everyone make sure that they're muted? Yes, do go on, Anna. That's fine. We can come back to what people would like to learn from this webinar later on. Okay, excellent. So we asked our members who are regularly involved in recruitment what they would like to impart as information to applicants and people attending for interview. So we asked them, what are you as a recruiter looking for when you're interviewing? We asked them, what are the key areas where candidates need to improve that they've noticed when they're interviewing? We asked them, what are your recommendations for interview preparation, and how can candidates stand out at interview, particularly with regard to competitive posts? And they told us, Anna, what did they tell us?
Yeah, so we've drawn out a few of the themes that came across. We had a few responses and we tried to theme them together for you. So the first thing that which was brought out was actually people really like to hear succinct answers to the question. So it can be quite easy to ramble, I guess, in an interview. And actually what they really like to hear is actually succinct answers with a good structure to them. And that came up many times. And obviously you can see there the second one is organisation of the answer. So those two kind of go hand in hand together. So to keep your answers succinct, but to have some level of organisation to what you're saying. Another theme that cropped up was an awareness of trust values. Some of you may know that some trusts, not all trusts, but some trusts do adopt a trust values-based interview approach. And so they will be looking out to see not only if you mention those trust values, but actually if you do embody those trust values in your answers that you're giving. They also want to see that you've actually got some evidence of preparation for the interview, so that you haven't just turned up for it to be just another one of the interviews, that you actually have given some thought into who it is that you've applied to work for, what kind of role it is, the teams that you'll be joining. Also to have some evidence of critical thinking, so I guess that deeper level to your answers when you're giving an answer to something. Are you able to give it a bit more of a critique in what you're saying? Also, ability to reflect on previous experience and show you're learning from this. So when you are giving your answers, it can often be really, really helpful to actually say, and this is an example when I used this theory or this skill, or this is what happened and this is what I learned. And finally, demonstrate knowledge of the role and service. So again, feeding into that one, which was evidence and preparation for the interview. So again, you know, who it is that you've applied to work for, who it is that you're interviewing for, what services it is, what it is about that service that you want to work for as opposed to a different service. So these were just a few of the themes that we were able to pull out from those answers.
Thank you very much, Anna. That's great. So shall we introduce Nicola? Nicola, thank you so much for coming to join us. We're really looking forward to hearing what you've got to say.
That's no problem at all. So I'll just take over sharing the screen. Whilst I'm doing that, because the way my screens are set up, if anyone raises their hand or asks questions, can I just ask that someone shouts out and lets me know, as I just can't see it as well. But hopefully you should now be able to see my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen, and probably it's best if we save the questions till the end, if that's okay.
Yep, that's no problem at all.
Fabulous.
Okay. So thank you so much for actually letting me be a part of today's session and joining in for this. So my name is Nicola King. I am the Leadership and Talent Academy lead within the Hertfordshire Partnership Foundation Trust. We're based in Hatfield, but we have branches across Essex, Norfolk, Beds as well. And we really do focus just on mental health support. So for me, I'm here today to give you just a brief overview of job interviews, hopefully a couple of tips to help you get through it as well. I only recently joined the trust at the beginning of May, so interviews are definitely not a distant memory for me at the moment, but hopefully I can give you some tips to support you and make them less scary. So the first thing we'll take a look at is very much just the normal interview structure. I'm sure you all recognise, having been through this at some point, and we'll go through each section at a time. Really, it compromises of the introductions. So, you know, that standard, hi, nice to meet you, introducing yourselves. At that point, you might have that small talk about how the journey was the parking okay? And the interviewer may choose to take you through the structure of the rest of the interview. The next 3 boxes pretty much are that structure of the interview, but be aware that depending on the interviewer and how they want to do things, they can move those boxes around. So it's not necessarily going to be that they give you the information up front about the role. It might be something they wait for after they've done your questions. But just to give a further overview of all of those steps, you've got the role information, which will just be an overview of the company, the role and the team. My top tip in that is to pay attention, as the top information the interviewer is giving you is likely going to be the top focuses that they see in the role, and that's top of their mind, so they're going to be the most frequent. So that can then help you when you're tailoring your answers to the questions to meet those requirements and to really show, oh, if they're saying that actually dealing with difficult stakeholders is quite a focus, I can evidence that I've done that. The majority of the session will then form the questions to you, and on the next couple of slides we'll take a look at what questions you might receive and how best to answer them. But then you'll also have questions from you, so it's your opportunity to ask questions which show your knowledge and interest in the role as well. I'd also caveat that interviews are a lot more two-way now, so it should be an opportunity for you to decide if the role's actually for you. The interviewer will then close the interview, likely advising if there's next steps in the process at all. The one thing that I will say is like basic principles to apply to any interview stage is to make sure that you're showing your confidence in your responses. We said on a previous slide about reflecting and showing that learning, but also don't apologise for your decisions. If they're different from what that trust does or what you do now, it's more important to advise what you've learned and what you would do differently now. And then be honest, but remember you are selling yourself. So you don't want to start complaining about your current role, organisation, or if you're dealing with any difficult colleagues. You want to make sure it's quite neutral as to the reasons why you're looking for a role and what you can bring. Okay, so let's move into the types of questions. So generally, and this HPFT specifically use 2 different types of questions, but they are, particularly the top one, very popular in interviews. So they are competency questions as well as situational. So a competency question is really looking at your previous experience. So it's directly asking you to evidence how you've met the skill set and show you something that you've already done. The easiest way to tell these ones are they're likely going to begin with, can you tell me about a time? Can you give me an example of? So they're really pointing towards what have you done and how can you evidence that? You then have situational questions. They can be more hypothetical. So they're asking you to advise what would you do in a given situation. And they're likely trying to see your thought process and your understanding of any procedures as well. So they could be things like, what would you do if you saw a health concern? What if you saw a safety risk? I will say another top point to take into the interview is if you can change a situational question to say, this is what I would do, and it's because I've done it before. Here's an example, and use that to point out a previous experience. You've then taken that step further from it being just hypothetical and saying, I have the skills to do it and I can show you that. Now that we've taken a look at what we might be asked, let's take a little look at how we should answer them. The preferred method used across any interview is generally the STAR acronym. It's the ideal that with each question, you are answering each point of this STAR framework. So first of all, you've been asked a question and you're going to set the scene of the situation. So we're talking about the issue here. How did this come about? Can you provide enough context for them to understand but not getting bogged down into this part when answering, as it's not the main point of the question. You then take a look at the task. So if this was the issue, what were you going to do about the issue? What did you or the company realise had to happen to resolve it? Then taking it through into the action. So this is your real chance to start selling yourself and adding in those details. This is the main aim, this and the results section, the main aim of the question. While some aspects may be mentioned that you did as a team, make sure that you are highlighting your individual contributions. Wherever possible, make sure that you are identifying what you did, starting sentences with, I did this, and as part of it, I did that. There might be occasions when it is we, but then it could be we as a team were looking at this and my individual contribution, to make sure you're really highlighting the impact that you have had. And then finally, we take a look at the result. So advising the impact your contributions did make. What was the overall outcome of you or the team's action, and was the goal achieved? Going back to what we've been saying throughout, that actually, if you've had learnings, that's great. If the goal wasn't achieved, that can be okay too, but explain why it wasn't and add in that reflection. So did you discover new information along the way which changed the best outcome? Was a wider change going on which made it no longer relevant? Things like that, which shows that you've reflected and learned and you've adapted as well. And then the last part that I just wanted to take a look at was preparing for the interview itself. So as mentioned on that first page that Anna showed us, it's about researching the organisation and the job. This will help you to prepare for questions like, why are you applying for this role? And it will allow you to give genuine answers, but it also shows your keen interest in the position and the trust. Review the job description against your experience. So reviewing your experience and how it relates to the role that you're applying for. I always tend to recommend that you come up with examples as to when you've achieved or worked similarly to the items that are on the job description. Wherever possible, if you could round this up to just a few examples, so almost pulling multiple lines of the job description together into one example. That means that when you're answering interview questions, you're demonstrating multiple aspects of the job description in one, because there's never going to be an interview that's long enough to go through all of the job descriptions. Practice your phrasing. Now this one might sound a little bit mad, but practicing those examples and how you would actually explain them in person. Quite often we'll take a look at the job description and say, yeah, I've done that. Yeah, I know how to do that. And then we'll move on while we're preparing. But in the moment, we have a different mindset. So taking that extra effort to talk your examples out through that STAR approach. Consider meaningful questions. As we've mentioned, there'll be a chance for you to ask questions. And whilst we're all likely to go for the normal of when can I expect to hear back, take that time to consider the job. What is important to you in a working environment? What support might you need to be successful in the role? And use that to create some meaningful questions that not only highlight you've thought about yourself being in the role and you understand the role, but it gives you that chance to identify if this is the job for you. So some of the ones that I tend to ask is, what are the biggest issues or top priorities in the trust, which can just help to highlight to you what the main focus is of the role when you come into it, and what's the culture of the team. Try to relax. I know that one is a lot easier said than done, but as I mentioned, interviews have shifted over time, and it's now an opportunity for you to learn about whether you want the role as much as it is for the interviewer to see if you're the right candidate. When you're relaxed, you'll be better able to respond accurately to the questions. You'll think through the preparation that you've done. You'll be a bit more personable and able to build a rapport with the interview. So remember that the interviewer already believes that you can do the job because they shortlisted you. It's now just your opportunity to highlight why you'd be amazing at it. So whatever works for you, find a way that you can relax beforehand, whether that's preparing, focusing on your breathing, visualizing the interview, whatever helps. And then my last point is just to get feedback. Always remember that in most cases there is only one role and multiple people applying for it. So not every interview is going to lead to an offer, but it can lead to success if you ask for feedback and ensure you do press in for really quality feedback on what was missing and what you can improve to ensure that you do better next time. So that is it for me. I hope that was helpful as a bit of a run through. I'll send through a copy of my slides so that if they're useful, they can be populated around, and I'll hang back for questions after.
Thank you so much. I really like what you said about practice the phrasing. I think that's really helpful, really thinking about how you're going to say something when it comes to it. The other thing I wanted to add was, I think thinking about what you said about relaxing, if you're anything like me, I get very anxious in interview situations, and I think we kind of almost expect that as well. So even if you can't relax, it's not the end of the world. We're expecting people to be nervous, and it's not a disaster, is it?
And I'd also second that from the other side, I've done a lot of training to managers on interviewing, and quite often they're nervous too.
Yes.
It's not normal for them to do interviews every time, and they want to get the best out of you, so they're not quite sure how to approach it. So if it helps to balance the field, everyone is nervous in that environment. It's not fun to interview.
That's a really great point. Thank you. And I'm really pleased that you're going to hang around and answer some questions with us at the end. Anna, shall we put our slides back up? Thank you. So hopefully we can build on what Nicola's already been saying when we think about what to expect in an interview for the psychological professions in particular. So one of the things that we thought it's really important to do is to think about what kind of role it is. Is it a training role that you're applying for? Is it a non-training role? Or is it a qualified position? Because the kind of role that it is will determine what type of interview, who's on the panel, and the type of questions that you'll be asked. So think about the service. What kinds of skills and qualities will you need to show? Pay attention to the job description, as Nicola said, and the person specification, and think about all of the information that you have about the role. Last month, Jessie talked to us about how to make a really strong application form, and she was really encouraging people to ring up beforehand and talk to people in the service, talk to people who'll be interviewing, really find out about the role. And it's surprising how often that doesn't happen. Do make contact. It doesn't mean that you'll necessarily be successful, but please do phone up and speak to people, find out as much as you can. This will give you really good tips about what the interviewers are going to be looking for. Thinking about panel members. Do you have the names in advance? What can you find out about them and their interests? Thinking about trainee roles. If you're going for a trainee role, there may be joint interviews, both with the university offering the training and the service who are going to be hosting you. Sometimes you might need to be interviewed by one and then the other, and sometimes both together. But you need to think about how to show that you can do the clinical aspects of the role and how to prove that you can complete the course as well. And they'll be looking for both of those skills. If you've ever worked alongside completing a course, then it's an excellent opportunity to talk about that and how you managed to achieve that. We were thinking about the kinds of questions that typically come up in psychological professions interviews. Typically, there's a question about risk, identifying, managing and responding to it. There might be something about enabling access to different populations. How can you adapt treatment for particular groups of people, for example? Often there's a question about a particular case or a challenge that you've had, and that's to draw out what you've learned and what you might do differently in the future. This is designed to get at your reflective abilities. There may be a question on your use of supervision or your ability to work as a team member. Those are popular questions. Interview panels are increasingly including service users and carers. Later on, Kevin, one of our PPN experts by experience, is going to tell us about his experience and knowledge from interviewing. But when you're thinking about experts by experience on panels, think about the qualities and skills and values that you admire personally. If you were using services, would you want anything different? What would you look for? How can you embody those things? Increasingly, there's a recognition that interview panels need to be more representative of the population in general, and that interview panels play a really valuable role in increasing access to and diversity within the psychological professions. As time goes on, we really hope to see that interview panels will show increased diversity and demonstrate even more of a welcome to those from diverse backgrounds. We had to think about role plays and scenarios and case vignettes. These help us gain a more realistic perspective of a candidate's real life behaviours and particular areas of knowledge. Role plays can give an insight into your communication skills. This includes your verbal and non-verbal skills, your gestures, your facial expressions, as well as what you say. Interviewers will be looking for your sensitivity, your responsiveness, your empathy, your interpersonal warmth. Can you form a relationship and engage the other person in the role play? They will also probably be considering your ability to structure and pace an exchange, rather than letting it wander aimlessly. Can they spot theories that might be guiding what you're saying or doing? Be prepared to reflect on your role play performance and say what you could have done differently. Finally, undertaking a new role can be stressful. There may be a question on your resilience and ability to manage stress and competing demands. Have a think about how you'll make the role sustainable for you in the long term. What is your position on achieving a work-life balance? Have a think about it and how you might talk about that in an interview situation. And you're going to talk us through this, Anna, aren't you?
Yeah, thanks, Maggie. So we are in a moment going to move on to Kevin, who, as Maggie mentioned, is one of our experts by experience within the PPN. We also reached out to some of our other experts by experience who have also been panel members on interviews for psychological professions, and asked them what is it that they look out for when on the panel when they're speaking with interviewees. And again, we drew out some of the main themes. And there were 3 themes that we really pulled out. First of all was personality. So please do let your personality show in an interview. So as Nicola and Maggie mentioned, we might be nervous in an interview, but still try and let your personality show through. Let them know if you're friendly, because they want to know if you're going to fit in well with their team. Your knowledge. Clearly explain what you know. Remember to draw on previous experiences as examples to back up what you're saying. And finally, your communication. So try to be concise, answering questions in a clear and structured way, while still being thorough and showing depth in your answers. So for example, that might be by using the STAR method. Be responsive to what is being said to you. So when you're asked a question, really actively listen to what's being asked and then respond. So I'm now going to hand over, I believe, to Kevin.
Thanks very much, Anna. Thanks very much. Well, that was pretty comprehensive, and from Nicola and the other team. So what am I going to add to this? Well, the first thing I'm going to add is a question. Why do you think there should be an expert by experience on your interview panel? You know, have you ever thought about that? Have you thought about why would we do that? Why would a trust do that? Why would a university do that? Why would I want to be on that interview panel? So while you have a think about that, I'll give you a few pointers onto why that is. So the way I see it is that you know, in normal business, normal corporate stuff, you would expect to do something for your customer, your client, and the service users and the carers. You wouldn't be surprised how many people do not know actually what a carer is. So if you're not sure what a carer is, a family member, an unpaid, informal member of that person's community, then I would suggest you have a look up and see what that really is. Some people said the other day that they don't have any carers, in that they have parents and family members. So that was an answer that came out by a certain team. So what is a carer, and what do they do? And so why should they be on the interview panel? Well, and what are they looking for? So what am I looking for when I'm on a panel? You've seen it before. I'm looking for somebody that's approachable, that connects easily, that you can actually sort of get on with. But some of the other more sort of detailed things is someone that listens to the questions, and someone that listens to, the body language, I suppose, everything about that question and what it is and what the lead. Have they read the job description? Have they read the values of the organisation, the ethos of that organisation, particularly, as I say, relevant to service users, carers, but even also other staff. And we've actually heard the one there about diversity there. When you actually do you consider diversity? Do you consider what makes it an easy communication? How do you generate personalised care? And we've also seen about how you do that in your answers, which is very good, is that if I go through an interview and not once does somebody mention a carer in the plan, it rings alarm bells. And if somebody's even got carers on their CV and they mention carers on a project and they never mention that project in any way, again, I get concerned about do they really know what a carer is and how to support a carer in that sort of situation. So I like to see respect in all the things and the answers they give, that shows how they've considered, all the parties, all the people involved in those scenarios, those examples they've done, that they truly have, demonstrated the fact that they are considerate of people. We like to look at how they consider shared decision making, where they actually, they're not directive, they're not telling people what to do, but they're actually working with people to come up with a co-produced solution. And even more so, if you're working on research or you're working on improvement of a care pathway or something like that, that your motive would be to hear the voices of service users, carers, staffs, and all other stakeholders as well that are involved in that. So so sort of things that is that people think about their answers. Yeah, one of the most frustrating things, I suppose, as somebody who gives their voice and their opinion, their perspective into situations, is a quick answer, a solution, a quick solution, because we know that if it had been that easy, then somebody else would have already been doing it and done it, so you wouldn't need that. So a well thought out, a well considered and an inclusive answer is what I'm looking for. Thank you very much, Megan.
Oh, sorry, I was speaking again. I was muted. Thank you, Kevin. That's really great and really helpful for you to have posed that question so that we can think for ourselves about actually why is it so valuable. And I guess that shapes how we might go about answering it. So thank you very much for coming and sharing your insights and thinking with us about what you might be looking for. And interestingly, it kind of chimes with what our professionals on the panel said about well thought out and concise and thoughtful answers. And of course, it's fine in an interview situation to pause and stop and take some minutes to think. Nobody expects you to be able to come up with perfect answers straight away. It's fine to stop and think. So, shall we go to some of the questions in the chat? Nicola, would you like to join us again? Thanks.
Of course.
And Kevin, you're back. That's fantastic. Brilliant. Thank you.
So should I go back to the beginning of all the questions and then we'll work our way through as many as we can?
Yeah.
So the first question is saying, somebody says they're currently working towards a psychology master's but have very little experience due to working in a school and having a child. When looking at job adverts such as assistant psychologists, I notice it is very full on. For example, working 3 days and uni or training and assessments. However, what is the flexibility like getting into this field? For example, flexible working, late start, working from home, part-time. I am concerned I won't be able to pursue this career.
Shall I start with an answer here? I think as a general principle, we are really committed to developing a diverse workforce, and we are keen to accommodate potential members of staff with a range of abilities and needs. But that said, it's not always possible to accommodate everyone's individual needs, but still also meet the needs of the service. So when we're recruiting, we're trying to balance out what are the needs of the service and the needs of people who are using the service and the needs of our staff members. But in theory and in principle, we're really keen to develop a diverse workforce. If it's a training role, there might be some flexibility about when you're in the service, but the university might, for example, be less able to flex. I guess trainees need to, in particular, work sufficient hours in order to make sure that they meet the requirements of the course and so on. So I guess that's my thinking, but certainly it's always worth applying, and it can be discussed at interview what the possibilities are for flexibility. That's my thoughts.
Yeah, I was going to echo that. I don't think there's any one standard rule on that. It will depend on the trust, the job itself, and what they can operationally provide in terms of flexibility. But in any case, I'd recommend applying and having that discussion with the hiring manager. Particularly, we're seeing generally in HR that the world is changing and we are trying to be more flexible. So there's going to start being more space to play in that sort of area and have that flexibility. I don't know if it'd be very beneficial to mention that if you are struggling to get experience on a wider basis, maybe taking a look at volunteer opportunities. I personally volunteered for the HPFT before I actually joined them, and that was flexible to what I could deliver. And it was just a couple of hours on a Friday morning around 2 different jobs. So having those opportunities and seeking them out might also help out.
Go ahead, Kevin.
I mean, I think I'd add it was similar to the interview questions there. Whatever you bring to an interview from your volunteering or training, it's the same answers as if you were working. And you've really got to show that you didn't just turn up and, I don't know, sat in the corner. Really, truly, basically, you've got to show that really what the interaction was, what you learned, how you developed, how you grew from that experience. So everything you do has got to be put in that context, I would suggest. Doesn't matter what it is, it can even be your home life. But, you know, how are you a learning reflective? Somebody said about the mention, you know, how have you grown from your experience of volunteering? So.
Thank you. I think my experience is that more and more people are valuing being able to work flexibly, and more we're working to accommodate that as best we can.
I think also, just to add on to it as well, because I know this is something I've done in the past as well, is I've known actually if at a certain point in my career, I think actually for me, working from home would be better for me than it would be going into an office every day, then I would purposely search for jobs that do say that this allows either hybrid working or work from home. So I kind of know from the get-go that they are open to that as an option. And I found that quite helpful as well in terms of trying to balance that work-life balance.
Thank you, Anna. Kevin, come back in.
I'd also like to say that, you know, if you are an informal carer and yourself, then you have the right to ask for flexible hours. That doesn't mean you'll get them, but you have that right. But equally, you know, see whether the organisation has, I don't know, they don't quite call them support groups, but a diversity group. You know, we have carers, we have other sort of things like that. So have a look to see whether the trust actually does support something like that you think you're applying to, or those organisations as well.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next one I think was a response to the aims or what they're hoping to get out of today's meeting. And their comment was that it'd be great to see the different components involved within an interview, such as role plays and general questions and how best to answer them. I think we've covered this, but I don't know if anyone wants to add anything extra.
I mean, I just want to say, I mean, I do work on a simulation hub where we have actors come in and do that, and it's incredibly powerful. The thing to remember, I think, when you're doing this is that whatever you're doing, whatever you're role playing, you've only got a few minutes. You know, you might normally take an hour, it might normally take 2. So you're not expected, well, you shouldn't be expected to get everything out and do everything on that. So don't sort of panic or don't kick yourself about that, but really think about, you know, how am I, as we said, those softer skills, how am I just demonstrating those in that short time that I've done? I'm not going to cover everything. So.
That's a really good point, Kevin. Nicola, do come in.
I was just going to say, obviously, we haven't managed to put in role playing in today's session, but if you have a network, if you talk to people that are also on this chat, it's a good idea to actually do it together. It was something that we always encourage managers to do, and I've done historically, is the idea that you have one person doing the role play, one person almost being role played to as the responding person, and an observer, so that you get feedback from all different angles. And as much as it feels awkward to start, it's such a valuable experience because no other opportunity would you get both elements of that feedback to grow, and you can help each other progress through it.
Thanks for mentioning that. Can I also encourage everybody that very few people do a really perfect or even really good role play. It really doesn't. I guess what's most important is that you can reflect on it afterwards and think about what you would do differently. Don't worry about doing it perfectly.
Thank you. The next one is, I understand it might vary by trust, but are there any general guidelines in the NHS at the moment about whether interviews are online or in person?
Nicola, do you know the answer to this? I haven't come across anything.
I haven't, to be honest, and I can only speak of, like I say, my very recent experience of joining. My interview was purely remote, but another person in our team is going to be, we're filling that role, and they're going to be all in person interviews. So I don't think there are any general guidelines at the moment. I think it does come down to what people can fit into their times and the different aspects to consider in terms of inclusivity and people getting there as well. I will say the same rules apply for both, of just making sure that you're dressing appropriately, that you're being confident. It's just a bit more interesting to do it via Teams. And one top tip I will say is make sure that you're looking at the interviewer as opposed to yourself in the corner if it's a Teams one.
That's a good point. Kevin, do come in.
I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to take expenses, travel expenses, and going to interviews generally. Are they paid or are they not by NHS trusts, universities, or whatever?
That's a good question. I don't know of interviews being paid.
No, I don't know for definite, but I've never seen it be paid.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
I think we've got time for another question. What would be considered a trainee versus a non-trainee role? Which is a really great question because I think we've just assumed that. So I think it's really good that someone's asked that.
It is a really good question. So I guess I'm thinking, when I think about a trainee role, I'm thinking about the roles in the psychological professions that have a mixture of teaching. So you have usually a trainee period of time when you're having both teaching at a university setting, for example, and then the rest of the time you're on placement in a service, learning how to apply your learning in a practical environment. That's what I'm thinking about as being a trainee role. I don't know if anyone else thinks about it as any different. Okay, fine. Hopefully that's answered your question, Megan. Thank you for asking that. That was really helpful.
Great. we've got one question which isn't entirely related to interviews, so I'm wondering if we can answer that one separately, maybe afterwards, if you're happy with that, Maggie, or do you want to answer
Okay,
it?
yeah.
Yeah, okay. And then, but we will get back to you with your question. Then one more question is, when the interview panel is deciding on who fits the role best, is there a structured / objective way they decide this?
Yes, Nicola, would you like to come in and answer this?
So personally, I haven't seen the interview process internally through yet, but I know that we agree a list of questions and each candidate goes through it, and they're marked objectively against it to make sure that they're matching it to the job description and those questions.
Yes. Go ahead, Kevin.
We also discuss our scores, if you want to put it that way. So we might refine our scores through the process on doing that, and then we add them all up and just those numbers. But what I'm trying to say there is that we do double check against each other in case we miss something, in case we can agree about something as well as that. So I find it works pretty well. It worked pretty well. And it is tried to be made as objective as possible against the person's spec and the other things and the things that you would require, like the things I said that I'm looking for. We also try to, the questions we ask, we try to co-produce those. I just wanted to put that in on the EBE one. We do like to co-produce that. We even like to co-produce the job description, the person spec, the advertisement and everything all the way through the process, but that doesn't always happen. But at least on the questions on that, we do have that ability to often co-produce the questions so that we make sure that, well, to give the candidates the best chance possible of answering what we want to know about them, really. So I think it's a good process, And there is also checks and balances to take away any bias and things like that on the applications and the shortlisting, which I'm sure you covered last month. But yeah, just a reminder on that.
I think you make a really good point, actually, Kevin. And certainly whenever I've been part of interview processes, we have had a structured way of scoring and thought about the answers beforehand that we're expecting to hear, and then comparing the answers that we get and then scoring accordingly. And also, you mentioned biases there, trying to be really alert to any biases that we might be operating under in interview circumstances. So trying to be really mindful of that and trying to just think about how we might be interpreting certain answers and trying to be as open and neutral as we possibly can.
And ensuring that reasonable adjustments have been made.
Yes, exactly. That's a really good point as well. Thank you. I wonder if at this point we should move on. If you have any further questions, let us know and we will answer them after this event and put the answers on the website. Thank you for your questions. Yes, this is a really good opportunity. We want to tell you about an assistant psychologist post, the senior assistant psychologist post that will be shortly coming up within the Psychological Professions Network here in the East of England. So Anna will be moving on to clinical psychology training, and that leaves her post vacant. And we will be advertising that within the next couple of days. So do keep an eye on the PPN website and look out for assistant psychologist jobs on NHS jobs website. And just to say a little bit about the post, it's supporting the work of the PPN and the psychological professions generally across the region and at a national level. There's a particular emphasis on communities of practice like this one and working with our fabulous experts by experience like Kevin. There's also clinical work within the Psychological Therapies for Severe Mental Health Problems service in Mid-Essex and the HBFT NHS Talking Therapies digital team. So do keep your eyes open and do apply if you're interested. We would certainly welcome an application from you. And now if you could please turn to our Communities of Practice survey, which Anna has very kindly put into the chat. just to emphasize again, it really does make a difference to us what you tell us, and we do think about it and change our approach accordingly. So if you could just spend a few minutes clicking on that link and filling it in, we would be really grateful. I'm just going to give it another minute. Excellent. Okay, so thank you. Our next meeting is on Tuesday, the 25th of July, again at 6:30, and we will be concentrating on self-reflection, self-practice, or self-practice, self-reflection. So really developing those skills and thinking about that further. Kevin, your hand is up.
Yeah, I think I know what self-reflection is. I'm not sure I know what self-practice means.
So self-practice is applying those skills to yourself and seeing what you can learn from it, and then reflecting on it and thinking how it might apply to your clinical work.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thanks for asking the question. And you can sign up to our next event on Eventbrite. If you're not a member of the PPN, it's free to join. Do join up, then you can really find out what's going on, and you can contribute and learn and be part of things and help have a unified voice for the psychological professions. So please do join up. It's free, it's very quick. Tick the box which says East of England, and then you'll be connected to us. Thank you. There are some resources, so do have a look at those. You'll be able to find this presentation on our PPN website along with the recording, so do take a look. It just remains for me to thank our presenters, to thank Nicola, to thank Kevin, to thank Anna for the work that you've done, and also to our steering group members. Thank you very much, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you.